Hold her. Don't let her through." The security guard's voice cut across the polished floors of Holt Renfrew like a blade. The woman he was talking about was 71 years old. She wore a cream cardigan she had owned for 9 years and sensible flats that her late husband had once said made her look like a schoolteacher. She held her handbag against her chest, the way people do when they are frightened, and trying not to show it. "I paid," she said. Her voice was steady, only her hands were not. "Please, check your system again." Nobody checked anything. Diane Forsyth, the floor manager, materialized from between two perfume displays with the particular confidence of someone who had never once been wrong about anything. She wore her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to be pulling her expression along with it, a permanent look of thin-lipped authority that she wore like a uniform. "We have protocol," Diane said, "and our protocol says you don't leave until loss prevention clears you." Phones appeared. 6, 7, then a dozen. People adjusted their angles for better light. Clara Brennan noticed none of the phones. She noticed the woman's hands. Clara had been standing near the cosmetics counter, waiting for a receipt on a birthday gift for her landlady when the commotion started. She was 31 years old, round-faced and soft-shouldered, the kind of woman who wore cardigans to blend in and had spent most of her adult life successfully doing exactly that. She worked as a freelance bookkeeper out of a cramped office above a dry cleaner on Queen Street West. She had 3 clients who liked her and 2 who tolerated her, and she ate lunch alone most days and never minded. She was very good at watching without being seen. And what she saw now was an elderly woman whose knuckles had gone white around her handbag strap. A woman who had stopped arguing not because she was guilty, but because she understood that arguing was no longer the point. Diane stepped closer. "Empty the bag." "I will not." The older woman lifted her chin. "I've done nothing wrong." Diane's hand moved toward the bag. Clara moved first. She crossed the floor in 4 steps, positioning herself between Diane and the elderly woman with the matter-of-fact steadiness of someone parking a car. "No drama, no announcement, simply, here." She stood with her back to the woman and faced the manager directly. "You need to stop," Clara said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended, but it did not waver. "You don't have proof. You have a suspicion." Diane looked her over once. The cardigan, the sensible shoes, the soft waist, and apparently decided Clara was not a significant obstacle. "This doesn't concern you." A woman being publicly humiliated concerns anyone with a conscience. Clara held her ground. "If you have evidence, call the police. If you don't, let her go." Something moved across Diane's face. Not anger exactly. More like the look of someone who has been contradicted in front of an audience and has decided to make an example. Her hand came up fast. Clara turned her head a half-second too late. The slap landed flat across her cheek with a sound that silenced every corner of the floor. The phones kept recording. Clara did not move. She absorbed the sting. It was substantial, and then she turned back, slowly, and looked at Diane with an expression that was not anger and not fear, and was somehow more unnerving than either. "There," she said calmly. "Now you've assaulted someone with witnesses. Would you like to keep going, or would you like to call your legal department?" The silence that followed had a different quality than the one before the slap. This one was attentive. Loss prevention was summoned. Security footage was pulled up on a monitor in the manager's office, while Clara stood beside the woman with one hand resting lightly near her elbow, not holding, just near. The way you stand next to someone who needs to know they're not alone. The footage was damning, and it was not damning of the elderly woman. It showed her picking up a small glass perfume bottle, examining it, setting it back on the shelf. It showed another shopper, younger, distracted, wrestling with a tote bag and a phone call simultaneously, lean against the counter, knock the bottle unseen into the open mouth of her own bag, and walk away none the wiser. The officer who had responded to Diane's call watched the footage twice without commenting. Then, he turned to the manager. "Before you detained this woman in front of your store, had anyone confirmed the item was actually missing?" Diane's mouth opened. No useful words came out. The officer looked at the elderly woman. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the disruption. You're free to go." She thanked him with a grace that made Clara's chest ache. She didn't demand anything further from Diane. She simply picked up her handbag, straightened her cardigan, and said, "I hope the next customer you accuse is someone who can afford a lawyer." It was, Clara thought, perfect. Outside on Bloor Street, the October sky was doing something kind with the afternoon light. Clara walked with the woman to the corner without quite deciding to. It simply felt wrong to leave before knowing she had her footing back. "Thank you," the woman said. "I've been thanked by strangers before. Never quite like that." "Like what?" "Like it cost you something." She glanced at Clara's cheek, which was still flushed. "It did cost you something." Clara almost said it was nothing. She stopped herself. "I've spent my whole life being invisible in rooms like that," she said instead. "I didn't want you to feel it too." The woman was quiet for a moment. "What's your name?" "Clara." "I'm Margaret." A brief pause. "My son is going to be insufferable when he hears about this." Clara smiled. Good he should be. They parted at the corner. Clara watched until Margaret had stepped into a waiting car. Not a taxi. A car with tinted windows and a driver who held the door open, before Margaret had even reached for the handle. She thought nothing of it. That evening, across the city, in a building whose address did not appear on any public registry, Vincent Cade loosened his collar after 11 hours of meetings that had nothing to do with the real estate development firm whose name appeared on his business cards. His real business had no business cards. He had built it over 15 years through patience and precision and the kind of stillness that men who shouted in negotiations always underestimated. He controlled 3 major distribution networks along the 401 corridor. He had ended 4 turf disputes without a single public incident. His name was spoken in certain circles the way people talk about weather systems, with respect for what it could do and a careful neutrality about whose side you appeared to be on. He was reviewing documents when his chief of security, a compact and humorless man named Wells, appeared in the doorway with the posture of someone delivering news he hadn't been looking forward to. "Your mother called," Wells said. Cade looked up, and "She had an incident at Holt's," he added quickly. "She's fine, but there were bruises, her wrists." Cade set down his pen. He said nothing. The quality of his silence changed, and every person in the room felt it, not passivity, but the motionless concentration of a pressure system before it breaks. "Show me," he said. The store had sent the footage within the hour, less because they were cooperative, and more because Wells had a phone manner that made store managers feel very motivated to be helpful. Cade watched every second without speaking. He watched the guard grip his mother's arm. He watched the phones rise. He watched Diane Forsyth's hand move in that particular arc. And then he watched a woman in a dark cardigan step into the frame. She didn't hesitate. She didn't calculate. She simply moved, positioning herself between his mother and the point of impact with the decisive calm of someone who had already decided, and the decision was final. He watched her take the slap. He watched her turn back and speak. He couldn't hear the words through the footage, but the composure in her face was remarkable. Not performed composure, the real kind, which is rarer and harder and costs more. He watched her stand with his mother through the entire investigation. He watched her outside, on the sidewalk, walking Margaret to the corner, not because she had to, because she wanted to know the woman was all right. the footage ended. Wells waited. "Her name," Cade said. "Working on it." "Find her." A pause. "Tell the team nothing that frightens her. If she doesn't want to speak with us, we walk away." Wells absorbed this. It was unusual. Vincent Cade did not generally offer people the option of walking away. Clara Brennan, by that same Friday evening, was eating leftover soup at her desk and reconciling a restaurant client's August books, which had been a disaster in ways she was still fully mapping. The mark on her cheek had faded to a pale watercolor wash of pink. She had thought about filing an assault complaint, and then thought about the paperwork, and decided to think about it more tomorrow, which was what she always did with things she genuinely intended to eventually do. Her part-time assistant, Kit, had seen the mark when Clara arrived back that afternoon. "You should press charges," Kit said. "I'm considering it." "You say that about your gym membership, too." Clara had laughed. It was the best thing about Kit. What she didn't tell Kit, because she hadn't entirely worked it out herself, was that the afternoon had shaken her in a way that had nothing to do with the slap. It had shaken her because of what had come before it, the absolute certainty she had felt, crossing that floor, that she was doing exactly the right thing, even while every other person in the store had decided it wasn't their problem. She hadn't felt certain like that in a long time. She ate her soup and worked until 10, and walked home through the kind of October dark that Toronto does particularly well. She didn't notice the car parked across the street. Kay did not approach her that week. He was not an impulsive man. Impulsive men made choices they later had to correct, and corrections were expensive in his world, in ways that had nothing to do with money. He read Wells's reports with the careful attention of someone reviewing a document they intended to act on correctly, and only once. Clara Brennan, freelance bookkeeper, Queen Street West office, 2nd floor, 3 steady clients, 2 difficult ones, ate lunch at her desk, held the elevator for the dry cleaner's delivery men without being asked, left muffins, the bakery kind, not homemade, by the door of the building next door every Thursday morning, where a man slept in the alcove and never asked for anything. No agenda, no angle, no interest in the Moretti name, or the Cade name, or any name that meant money. She had simply seen someone frightened and decided that person shouldn't stand alone. He went on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the incident, with no agenda except honesty. The office was smaller than he expected, and better organized than most of his own. The window looked onto an alley, but someone had put a window box on the sill with late-season herbs still clinging to green, and the whole space smelled faintly of rosemary and printer ink. Clara was at her desk when the door opened. She looked up. He watched something move across her face, the brief, involuntary recalibration that happened when someone who looked like him walked into a room, and then she filed it away with impressive efficiency and stood. "Can I help you?" "I need someone to review a set of accounts," he said. "I was referred." "Who referred you?" "A business associate." He met her eyes. "I'd prefer not to give names before I know if we're a good fit." Clara studied him for a moment with a look she probably believed was neutral. It was not. She was reading him, the suit, the posture, the carefulness of his words. She was smarter than most of the people he negotiated with. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me what you need." They talked for 40 minutes. Cade had prepared a set of accounts from one of his cleaner subsidiary companies. Clara asked questions that were precise and occasionally inconvenient, and never softened to be polite. Twice she caught inconsistencies he had placed there deliberately, and both times she named them without apology. "You're good," he said. "I know," she said it without vanity, pure fact. "Do you want to move forward?" "Yes." She slid a contract across the desk. He read it, actually read it, every clause, and she watched him do it without filling the silence with reassurance. Most people filled silences. He respected that she didn't. When he signed, he stood to shake her hand, and he was close enough to notice the last pale trace of a mark along her jaw that the makeup had almost, but not quite, covered. He said nothing about it, not yet. His name on the contract was V. Cade. She called him Mr. Cade for the first 2 weeks, and he let her because it was professional and because watching her work was, unexpectedly, one of the more absorbing things he'd encountered in recent memory. She caught things, not just numbers, patterns, gaps, the shape of what wasn't there. She would pause over a column with her pen, hovering, and he would recognize the expression because it was the same one he used in rooms full of people, pretending everything was normal. She saw the architecture behind the surface. It made her faintly dangerous. It made him like her considerably more. He was in the office one November afternoon when she took a phone call she clearly hadn't wanted to take in front of him. She excused herself into the hallway and came back 4 minutes later with a carefully composed expression that didn't quite hide the tension underneath. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Fine." A pause. "My landlord's raising the rent in January. Building sold." She shrugged, practiced, dismissive. "Occupational hazard of small offices. I have a unit on Richmond. Smaller space, reasonable rate." She looked at him. "Why would you offer me that?" "Because you're good at what you do, and I'd rather you kept doing it without the distraction." It was honest. It was also not the only reason, but it was a real one. She said she would think about it. She thought about it for 2 days and called to say yes, and he could hear in her voice that she had argued with herself about accepting, and that saying yes felt like losing a small battle with her own self-sufficiency. He made a note to never make her feel that way if he could help it. The thing he had not anticipated, and Cade was a man who prided himself on anticipating things, was how much he simply liked being around her. Not the large moments, the ordinary ones. The way she read while she ate and got ink on her fingers from her pen and laughed at her own mistakes before she corrected them. The way she looked on grey November afternoons, sitting at her window, completely absorbed in something that had nothing to do with being observed. She looked like someone in the process of making peace with taking up space in the world, and he found himself quietly, and with some surprise, entirely on her side. His mother was not subtle about any of this. "She's wonderful," Margaret told him over Sunday dinner. "You've met her twice." "I'm 71. I don't have time for gradual impressions." She refilled his coffee without asking. "She has a beautiful laugh and good instincts. You can't teach instincts, Vincent." He said nothing, which his mother correctly read as agreement. The Foundation's annual gala was held at the Royal Ontario Museum in late November. Margaret's foundation, which supported elderly care facilities across the province, Cade attended every year. He had not planned to bring Clara. The invitation had arrived at her office through what appeared to be a completely separate channel, which Cade had arranged with the focused attention he usually risked for complicated negotiations. Clara arrived in a deep green dress that she had almost certainly spent an hour talking herself out of wearing. She stood at the entrance to the exhibition hall with the expression of someone who is committed to jumping from a height and is now waiting to discover whether it will be relief or regret. She looked, Cade thought from across the room, extraordinary, the green against her warm skin. The way she carried herself, careful, watchful, but upright. He stopped mid-sentence and didn't notice he'd done it until the man beside him repeated himself. "Sorry," Cade said. "Excuse me." He was 12 feet away when Diane Forsyth appeared. She was in a column of champagne silk and the particular energy of someone who has recognized an opportunity. She materialized beside Clara and did not lower her voice. I didn't realize they'd started inviting bookkeepers to these things. Clara went still. Not flinching. Still, the practiced stillness of someone who had learned not to react in rooms full of people waiting for exactly that. I was invited, Clara said, quietly, clearly. By whom, exactly? By me, said Cade. He stepped beside her. Not in front of her, beside her. He faced Diane with the expression his security team called the quiet, which had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with consequence. Miss Forsyth. He let her name sit there. I'm aware of what happened at your store in October. The surveillance footage was very thorough. His gaze moved across the surrounding guests, who had, without discussing it, all turned to listen. The woman you detained that afternoon was my mother. A sound moved through the room. And the woman beside me, he continued, his voice unchanged in volume or temperature, stepped between your hand and my mother's face. She accepted that in front of an entire floor of strangers, who decided it wasn't their problem. Diane had gone the color of old candle wax. I wasn't aware. No, Cade said. You weren't aware, because you made a decision before you checked the facts. Tonight, you've done it again. He looked at her calmly. I'd speak to your legal counsel before the end of the week. He said nothing else. He turned to Clara. Are you all right? She exhaled slowly. I'm starting to develop a habit of this. The corner of his mouth moved. I've started to notice. He offered his arm. After a moment, a genuine moment of deliberation, which he respected, she took it. He told her everything 3 days later, in a booth at a Portuguese bakery on Dundas West that was genuinely his favorite place in the city and had nothing about it designed to impress. He wanted her to know the man before the version of the man that had been carefully built for everyone else. He showed her his photograph in a business publication she recognized. She looked at it for a long time, then at him. You own a real estate development company, she said. Several. And you needed a freelance bookkeeper on Queen Street. I needed a reason to be in that room. She was quiet. He told her the rest carefully, not as confession, not as apology, as fact, the networks, the territory, the discipline he had imposed on an organization that had, before him, operated through fear alone. The rules he had set and held, no trafficking, no children, no drugs. The structure that existed now mostly as a reputation, a gravitational weight that kept worse men from filling the space it occupied. Clara sat with her hands around a coffee cup she had stopped drinking from. Outside, a streetcar ground past on the wet rails, the sound of Toronto in November. You should have told me sooner, she said. I know. I don't belong in your world. You've been in it, he said, since October. She looked away. I'm a bookkeeper. I worry about January rent. You attend galas with senators. You were the only person in that store who moved. She closed her eyes briefly. I want to be specific, he said, and leaned forward, not dramatically, just enough that she would know he intended every word. I'm not here because of what you did that afternoon. Brave is just a word. I'm here because of what that moment revealed, that you don't calculate kindness. You don't weigh whether it's worth the cost. Most people do. They run the numbers and decide it isn't. He paused. You didn't run the numbers. Clara's jaw tightened against something. And every time I've been in that office since, he continued, I've watched you discount invoices for the clients you know are struggling. I've watched you leave your muffins at the corner alcove without making the man there ask. She laughed, short and surprised. You noticed the muffins. I notice everything about you, he said it simply, without performance. I notice that you are extraordinarily good at a job that doesn't get you the recognition it warrants. I notice that you make every room you're in warmer without appearing to try. I noticed, he stopped briefly, that you are one of the most genuinely beautiful people I have encountered, and that you have somehow decided this is not information that applies to you. Clara looked at him then, really looked. The way she looked at a column of figures she was trying to trust. "I've spent a long time," she said slowly, "believing I was too much in some ways and not enough in others." Clara. She met his eyes. "From the first moment I saw you on that footage," he said, "you were the only person in the room worth watching." She placed her hand on the table between them. Not reaching, just placing. He covered it with his and left it there. They stayed like that for a long time, in the window of a Dundas West bakery on a grey Thursday afternoon, while the city moved around them, and neither of them needed it to be more than what it was. The following spring, Clara's office on Richmond acquired a third room. The new space had a window that looked onto an actual street instead of an alley, and she had put a proper planter outside the entrance with herbs that would last well into October if the winter was forgiving. She had hired a second bookkeeper, a meticulous woman named Bex who had strong opinions about spreadsheet formatting and turned out to be exactly right about all of them. The clients came now in a way they hadn't before, not because of who she knew, though the referrals from Cade Corporation's legal team had not, in fairness, hurt, but because word had a way of traveling about someone who was genuinely good at what they did. The talent had always been there. It had simply been waiting for enough room to be visible. Margaret stopped in every few weeks, ostensibly to drop off papers, actually to sit on the small sofa by the window and tell Clara things about her son that Clara filed away with great fondness. Kit had learned to make 2 cups of tea without being asked whenever Margaret's car appeared at the curb. And Cade, who did not announce himself, who did not make productions of arrivals or departures, who moved through the world with the quiet assurance of someone who had long ago decided exactly how much of it needed to see him. Cade came in on Thursday evenings when the street was quiet, and the dry cleaner downstairs had gone dark, and the lamp on her desk turned the whole small room a color between amber and gold. He would sit across from her and read while she finished her work. Neither of them said anything for long stretches. The radiator ticked. The streetcar passed. The city did what cities do. Clara had spent so many years perfecting the art of making herself small, taking up less space, moving through rooms like a person apologizing for her own presence. She had become skilled at it, and skill, she had learned, was a particular kind of trap. You kept doing what you were good at long after it stopped serving you. She was done with that particular skill. She looked across the desk at him, the man who ran half of Ontario's shadow economy and came in on Thursday evenings to sit quietly in a lamp-lit room while she reconciled accounts, and felt, with the clean and settled certainty of a balanced ledger, that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not despite who she was, because of it. Outside, the late spring maples moved in the wind off the lake. The city hummed and carried on. Inside the small office above the dry cleaner, Clara Brennan worked, and the man, who had once watched her from a screen and understood immediately what she was worth, sat across from her in the quiet, and it was, by any honest measure, enough.